Hello. Countries around the world have passed and have begun to enforce anti-bribery and anti-corruption laws. Recent examples include the United Kingdom, US, China and Hong Kong. The enforcement of anti-bribery laws has had and will continue to have a dramatic impact on the liabilities of directors and officers of local and global companies. In order to provide directors and officers around the world with risk insights into these regulations and their enforcement, along with the potential exposures for directors and officers, we've developed a three-part series discussing anti-bribery statutes and enforcement in the UK, US, China and Hong Kong. In this webcast, we'll be focusing on the UK Bribery Act, which comes into effect in April 2011. We'll be looking at its implications for directors and officers with Martin Butterworth, who's a partner at Davis Arnold Cooper in the UK, and with Douglas Robare from Zurich Global Corporate. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. First of all, let's start at the beginning. What laws and statutes are effectively created by this new piece of legislation?
Well, the Bribery Act, first of all, codifies existing UK laws against bribery of various types, brings them all together. It also creates a brand new corporate offence, we haven't seen this before, of failing to prevent bribery, and that's an offence for the company itself to fall foul of. It works against someone who's incorporated here, someone who happens to trade here in whole or in part. It catches their agents and their subsidiaries, and it is there to catch all the second and third hand ways that bribes might get paid around the world. A bribe is a bribe. Forget illegal niceties. I pay you money, you take my money, and there's the financial advantage that is a bribe.
And in terms of the long and short-term implications for companies, how do you see them, Douglas?
Well, I think in the short term, companies need to get on the ball. We've got the Bribery Act, which has come into place and is effective as of 2011. I think that extension was given because corporates were not prepared for this. That's in the immediate term. They need to get on with their corporate governance policies associated with anti-bribery. Then in the long term, what they need to do is ensure that it's up to date. That it reflects everything that has a change in law, and that it's correctly articulated to the greater audience, which is the company, to ensure that they are not running afoul of the new law coming into effect. The costs of this are massive. As a point of example, we had a case in which 1.6 million billable hours were charged. And that equates to just under 183 days of someone consistently working and billing from a law firm, which I'm
Not
sure...
my law firm.
I hear lots of lawyers salivating at the thought of that.
Yeah,
what about in other jurisdictions? How's it work there? Similar legislation?
Yeah, similar legislation already exists, as you pointed out in the opening, with respect to Hong Kong and China. There's also legislation has historical significance, which is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the United States, or FCPA. This is going to be where the Bribery Act gets its guidance from, will be the United States and the policies and procedures that have been in place since the 70s.
It's very much the source for our Bribery Act, is what's been happening there already.
And in terms of fines and penalties, how we've touched on it already in terms of the cost implications. Can you expand on it a bit more?
Yeah, well, before we talk about fines and penalties, and moreover whether or not they're insurable, I think it's actually important to find out, is this stuff coverable under UK law?
Yes. Fines and penalties, maybe yes, maybe no. It's a maybe area as to whether they're covered. At law, our UK law in this area is quite complicated. It's not yet been applied specifically to the situation arising under a D&O policy, or with the proliferation of fines and penalties. We now have got criminal, administrative and civil fines and penalties. I don't think ever a criminal fine or penalty will get paid under a D&O policy, but the yes, no, maybe area is for the other two, for administrative and for civil penalties.
Well, using maybe as a backdrop, which is always a lawyer's trick, you have to look at the way the policies are constructed. Now, you're talking about the insurability of fines and penalties. Generally speaking, they're not covered. It's excluded in the definition of loss. That is the reason why insureds need to read their policies. Now, what is covered are the defense costs for individuals for investigations associated with fines and penalty. If it's against public policy, I don't think there is an insurance policy out there that could cover that.
So, Martin, how can directors protect themselves and their companies from exposure?
Well, the director's got a lot to think about. He's got his own personal exposure for being involved in or consenting to or conniving at a bribery situation. He's also got to be worried about breaching the new corporate offence, because that may come back on him through a derivative action or some other way later on. But the key to it is corporate governance. You have got to have a proper anti-bribery compliance policy in place, and a deep-seated code of conduct that goes with that throughout your corporation. And you have to train people to know it and to operate it. You have to have enforcement of it throughout your entire corporate empire. And you've got to have penalties for those who transgress. In particular, things such as having anti-bribery terms in your commercial contracts, great and careful scrutiny of any third-party payment that comes into your company from any part of the world. Your hospitality, you've got to be very careful about that, including lunches and coffees.
Coffee
Coffee here.
Bribe someone with a coffee.
Coffee here or coffee in Paris. Which would you prefer? You know, or lunch round the corner that might cost us £2,000 for just two people to go.
So I suppose one of the other areas we should look at is the whole issue of whistleblowing. What kind of changes and effect is that going to have?
Well, we have whistleblowing in this country. We don't have a duty at law on employees to actually whistleblow, but the courts have created an implied duty of fidelity, as they call it, for those who are in management or have supervisory roles to whistleblow. We have the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which protects a large category of whistleblowing to make sure that the employee is not unfairly dismissed or victimised by the company who's not too happy about the whistleblowing. And that works. There are whistleblowing websites you can go to help make sure that you give your whistleblowing disclosures within the compass of that act and get its protection. And the function really is to encourage the employee to whistleblow. Doug?
Yeah, I think just adding to that, there's the whistleblowing that's going to occur. There are similar statutes that exist in other jurisdictions, like the United States. This is almost an encouragement for people to come forward, and the regulator wants that to occur. The knock-on effect of that is going to be, the result of whistleblowing will be possibly additional regulatory investigations, potentially derivative actions, and also just general securities actions. But moreover, what I think will occur, there'll be an increase in overall self-disclosures by a company to the regulator because they'll have to do it.
Definitely.
Doug, where's this all leading for the D&O market?
Well, I think what we will see is an increase in regulatory proceedings. If we look at the United States as an example, given the fact that the Bribery Act has been built off of FCPA, last year there were 198 actions approximately brought. You could see similar numbers, maybe not in the beginning years, but definitely ramping up. This means a lot more costs, and as a result, Martin brought up in whistleblowing, with respect to self-disclosure, you're going to have insureds see a lot more requirement or potential requirement to notify their insurers.
If we're going to distill this discussion down to three key points that people really need to take away, what would those 3 points be, Martin, first?
Well, for me, it's corporate governance. The corporation must put in place those systems I outlined earlier as quickly as they can and as deeply as they can, embed them in their company.
And Douglas?
Well, multinationals, in particular, that do business in multiple jurisdictions globally, need to start to consider the anti-bribery provisions and how far down within the organization they go. Moreover, if they have joint ventures, they need to ensure that that there's adequate internal control so that should they have to go to the regulator with a self-reporting, they can evidence that they are correctly, they have a control environment.
And Martin, I guess the importance of reading your policy is pretty...
You must read the policy, absolutely. And what you have to do as a director and officer is look for yourself in that policy, because the company's there too, so make sure you're there alongside or ahead of the company for the kind of things we've just been talking about.
Well, reading your policy is important, but I would also say that one of the things you should do is, in addition to that, meet your claims department. You are buying a service, okay? And this is an advancement of defense cost policy, and I'd rather know people on day one, build a rapport, so that when the difficult discussion does occur, you're not talking over bills in the 11th hour.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid that is where we'll have to leave things for now. But if you want to add your points or have any questions, do please email us at directorsforum@zurich.com. Finally, thanks to our panel, Martin Butterworth from Davis Arnold Cooper in the UK and Douglas Robare from Zurich Global Corporate. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.